They say everything's gonna be alright.
The following is paid for by IMIC Incorporated.
The Cure with Aimee Cabo is brought to you by IMIC Research. Life can bring many difficult situations: domestic violence, addictions, poverty, and even sexual abuse by your loved ones. Welcome, Aimee Cabo and The Cure.
Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. I'm your host, Aimee Cabo, and this is The Cure. Our show is available live on the radio through our app called The Cure, our website, aimeecabo.com. That's Aimee with an I. Why? I don't know. It also has a double E at the end. On Roku, look for The Cure. On Android TV, under The Cure. Later, this show will air on Sirius XM Channel 131, Sundays at 5 p.m., the Family Channel, or as a podcast a few days later. We created this show as a safe space and to show that there is hope after going through difficulties despite any suffering, no matter what type. I'm trying to use testimonies to that effect, and I'm inviting professionals and speakers that can help with suggestions. As a survivor, I hope to inspire others, encourage transparency, and find strength in knowing that those who suffer are not alone, and those that heal against insurmountable odds do exist. I'm also joined by Dr. Boris Nikolov.
Hello.
And today we're going to talk about how using our faith will help us go through challenges. Our special guest is Dr. Charles Page. Dr. Page is known as the best guy to see on your worst day. He's a surgeon, author, storyteller, and coffee addict. Chuck has authored several books, including Surrendered Sleep, A Biblical Perspective, As He Stands, and The One-Eyed Monster Under My Bed. He and his wife Joanna live in Texas with their 5 children. He enjoys bush hogging on his trailer, playing with the kids in the triple-deck treehouse, and watching sunset on the back porch. Dr. Page, thank you for being with us. Welcome to The Cure.
Thanks, Amy. It's good to be here.
Thank you. Dr. Page, I'm curious, why is it that you call yourself the best guy to see on the worst day of our lives? I mean, don't we all need that? You must be very, very popular guy.
Well, not too popular, Amy. I'm the guy you hope you never have to see and you hope you have a very short relationship with. You really want me to come into your life and fix your problem and move on. So, I'm the guy that usually you have to see when you have, a bad diagnosis, breast cancer, colon cancer, you're in a car wreck and your spleen is bleeding or some, flesh-eating bacteria. It's usually not something, real favorable when we meet. So that's how I meet people. It's kind of strange.
Wow, that must be a very difficult job for you to meet these people, and I mean it's amazing that you can inspire them when they have such difficult challenges. I mean, sometimes we don't realize how easy we have it. Where did your interest of encouraging the sick and suffering come from? Because I know that you wrote a book called A Spoonful of Courage for the Sick and Suffering. Can you go into this a little bit, since they come to you at such a grave ill state? How is it that you do this?
Well, I'll tell you, Amy, it's pretty interesting. I think it's probably the other way around. My patients probably inspire me more than I inspire them. And so that's kind of what this work is about. It's just stories of ordinary people who, have responded to their circumstances in just unusual ways. And it really kind of shows the impact that faith can have in a person's life. And so, and kind of one of the neat things about my job, every day I get to wake up and realize it could always be worse, and it really kind of helps me to be thankful. But, but also, when I'm around these people, when I hear their stories and I see how they, respond, it kind of helps me to have a different perspective on things too.
So they've taught you something. I know that you've been a surgeon for 20 years. And tell me, what are your observations on faith when it comes to the effects of illnesses? as opposed to not having faith?
Well, first of all, and I don't want to bore you with a lot of literature, but there's a lot of studies out there that show that people who practice their faith actually have better outcomes, and they've done all these studies. In fact, there was one study in Iowa that studied these elderly people, and they found that people who were active in their faith actually had better survival than people who didn't. So, I'll tell you the funny thing about faith and sickness. Of course, we're never going to understand the meaning of suffering, on this side of heaven and on this side of eternity. But the people who seem to have the best outcomes, or seem to do the best, even in the midst of a bad outcome, are people who, they focus upward instead of inward. And then after focusing upward, they begin to focus outward and find other people that they can encourage. And those are the people who tend to, I've noticed, just do better across the board.
I understand perfectly what you're saying, because I realize that people with faith, they could have the same exact circumstance as someone else, but they seem to suffer less. And I'll give you an example. Not very long ago, I saw on TV that this spiritual family, somebody had killed their daughter, and this guy was convicted and had gone to jail, but they were able to forgive him. They accepted it. This was God's will, and only God knows why, kind of thing. And they were able to forgive him, and because they accepted it as God's will, they didn't suffer it like most of us do. They realized the person's in a better place, and the person in that place doesn't want us suffering. I know if I pass away, I don't want who I've left behind to suffer. So they get this greater understanding of things, and that's just when it comes to mental illnesses. And it's been amazing, because the power of the mind is really something amazing. I know that I saw on Facebook this guy, he had been emotionally abused as a kid, or if you think that your condition controls you or things like that, it's just a matter of reprogramming your brain not to believe in negativity. And I do believe that you have better outcomes if you believe you're going to get better, rather than give up and have a defeatist attitude, thinking this is the end. What can you tell me about that?
Well, I'll tell you, especially when it involves faith. Faith has a lot of different facets, and faith, we can't put a formula to faith. I mean, sometimes faith is believing the impossible, believing that God can do the impossible. And, I've seen people healed. But sometimes faith is also having faith that God is sovereign and he has a purpose, even when things are impossible. And one of the stories in the book is about a girl that came in. She had just graduated from college, and she had a closed head injury after a car wreck, and she was brain dead. Wow. And there was nothing that we could do, and she was dying before our eyes. And, as a physician, how do you communicate that to a family who just, 4 hours ago had a functional daughter? In fact, this girl was going to go to medical school. Wow. And, how do you convey that to the family? And they, as they kind of all gathered there in the emergency room and the girl was crashing, they began to pray. And they kind of formed a circle. And, I kind of went on and was doing my work and came back in the room and, because the girl was really kind of deteriorating quickly. And the grandmother asked me to come in and pray with them and kind of join the circle. One of the interesting things is Grandma prayed, she said, "Thank you, God, she's perfect." And I kind of opened one eye and looked at the girl, and, her head was bashed in and she was leaking fluid from her brain, and her blood pressure was crashing. And in my mind, I thought, perfect, what do you mean? And she just kept praying that, God, thank you that she's perfect, and I realized later that grandmother was seeing the unseen, and I'll tell you, that takes a lot of faith to be able to see that, in the midst of something with your granddaughter dying before your eyes, to have that kind of faith. And that's what I mean. You know, we can't put a formula on our faith, but we do know that God is there. And so, you know, just so many different things. I mean, on the other hand, you know, faith can believe the impossible. I have two friends that were missionaries in Kenya, and they're some of my heroes. And one was an obstetrician. Her name was Kim, and the other was a infectious disease doctor. And when they came back on furlough, they realized that she was diagnosed with breast cancer. Not just breast cancer, but metastatic breast cancer.
Wow.
And they had adopted 4 kids, and they're in Kenya, you know, and it was just devastating for them, and they really didn't know what the next step was. And so after some prayer, they decided to go back, and, you know, Kim was the one who had cancer. She said, you know, I could have cancer in the States or have cancer in Kenya. And, you know, as they decided to take that step and, you know, once again, looking outward instead of looking inward, God did the miraculous. You know, 14 years later, she hasn't had any recurrence, you know, which is pretty amazing.
That's incredible.
For a breast cancer. So, you know, faith has a lot of different facets to it, I think. And so often, I think we come into a crisis, and we're fixated on a certain outcome that we expect. And often God doesn't always answer our prayers the way that we want, you know. So that's what I've noticed in my practice with patients, is that, you know, faith involves a relationship.
Yes. Yes, it is true. And I've read it. I've read it in different places, and I've read it on Facebook. Miracles do happen. My daughter is an example of a miracle. She was almost killed in a 24-day coma, and she wasn't supposed to live, but she survived. Wow. And I was ready to accept God's will, whatever it was, because I want to be that person. I want to be that person that trusts God blindly, even when I can't see what's going on or I don't understand it. I want to accept the fact, I know the fact that God is in control and that I have my own will. I can go either way, but ultimately, God's in control.
It is really amazing, though. I'm going to intervene here because we were going through that situation together with Aimee, and then I was seeing her as a medical doctor. Her condition was totally bad, but Aimee was not losing faith. It's really amazing. Yeah.
Wow, to be a doctor and a parent going through that must have been just must have been crazy. You know, I think guys often in these situations, our feelings overwhelm us, and kind of one of the focuses of this book is to, you know, not that feelings aren't important, but to put them in the proper perspective. You know, we have to take a step back and look at the facts, you know. And you know,
the bigger picture.
We feel alone. You know, we feel inadequate to face whatever challenges that are in front of us. We feel confused. You know, why is this happening to me? Why God? Why now? Why not somebody else? And just going back to the facts, you know, Scripture reminds us that we're not alone, that Jesus has promised to never leave us or forsake us. You know, we have the Holy Spirit living inside us that can guide us. So we're never alone, you know, and for whatever circumstance we face, I really believe that God will give us, you know, and equip us to be able to manage whatever comes our way. You know, if He doesn't deliver us, then He will empower us to do what we need to do, you know?
Well, if we were born for a reason and God has a specific plan for each and every one of us, He gave us all different gifts, the gifts that He knew we needed. I do believe that. But there's also dark times. There's also evil. And He, you know, that gets in the way sometimes. And sometimes we can feel alone. And a lot of things can go wrong. And we can feel like we're down in the dumps. And we feel like God is not near. But that's exactly it. That's when God is. Always the most present. And for those who are tuning in, you're listening to The Cure with Aimee Cabo. We're focusing on leaning on our faith. We are joined by Charles Page, Dr. Charles Page. And sometimes what I was trying to say, Doctor, we can feel outnumbered. By Jamal Kennedy.
Stay with us.
And now we continue with Aimee Cabo and The Cure on 880 The Biz.
Welcome back. For those that are just tuning in, I'm your host, Aimee Cabo, and this is The Cure. If this is your first time tuning in, today we're joined by Dr. Charles Page, and we're talking about the essence of faith. Dr. Page, have you noticed any habits or characteristics of those who seem to thrive despite their serious health challenges?
Well, I think these people are focused. Like I said, they're focused outward. They're focused on other people. I mean, so often, I do think that, of course, nutrition and diet and family and all those things and relationships are super important. But it seems like people who tend to serve other people, they just tend to do better. In fact, a personal story: my mother died of breast cancer about 5 years of lung cancer. About 5 years ago.
Sorry to hear that.
And it was one of those things. She never smoked, and it really kind of caught us all by surprise. Kind of faked the doctors out.
Wow.
She had a normal chest X-ray, and she had a cough, and then a normal CAT scan. It was just one of those rare 1% type of cancers. And here I was. I mean, I'm a physician, I'm a surgeon, and I fix other people's problems, and I couldn't fix my mother.
And you felt helpless.
I did feel helpless and hopeless, and
Wow.
just depressed about the whole situation.
Yes, I'm sure.
And probably the same that kind of Boris felt, with your daughter.
Yes.
But this lady came along named Catherine, and Catherine came in with a locally advanced breast cancer, and she'd had it for quite a while and didn't see a physician. And at first, I thought, man, how could someone do that? And I realized that she felt like it was her time to go, and if God wanted to take her with breast cancer, that was the way she felt like she was going to go. But at the urging of her kids, she came in and had chemotherapy and surgery and all these things, and she was about the same age as my mother. And Catherine was one of these ladies that really didn't think about herself. She was just a real, very selfless person. And when Catherine found out about my mother, who had lung cancer, it's interesting how the conversation when she came into the clinic was never about herself. It was always about her mother. And she was always asking about my mother and encouraging me and telling me, how she was praying for my mother. Catherine expressed this by bringing us sacks of pecans. If you know anything about Texas, we love pecans. She'd go out at the river and she'd pick these pecans by the river and bring them in. And, she was picking those pecans. She'd tell me she'd be praying for my mother, and she brought in these little sacks of pecans. Man, that just did so much for me. I just couldn't imagine. Here was a person dying of breast cancer, and she wasn't even concerned about herself.
That's amazing.
And, it gives you a whole different even perspective of what it means to be healthy. But, and after she died about the same time as my mother, and, her now every year her kids bring me a sack of pecans just to remind me of her. But I just think about her, and I think about how her focus was not on herself. And I think she was one of the most healthy people I've ever seen. It's funny how that defies, I guess, the way we would typically think about health, as someone dying of cancer. But definitely...
if they're at peace, sometimes that's all that matters. Absolutely. So, I think that's a huge thing. People... we were talking about the difference faith makes. Just like last night, I was trying to get home to my family, and it was late, and I had to go in and see this lady. She was in her 40s, and she's a frequent flyer at our hospital, and I've seen her for several things, and it's kind of getting close to her time. And she had a tracheostomy in, and and she was about out of it. And I went and I pulled her tracheostomy. I had to put another one in so we could probably put her on a breathing machine later.
We were expecting to be, ventilated. And surprising to me, she woke up after I put the trach tube in, and she says, "Doctor, would you pray for me?"
Wow.
And I realized she did tank last night. She's not doing well, and I realized that, wow, that was a pretty cool thing to be able to share that with her and be able to pray for her that evening. Even though it was the last thing on my agenda, I just wanted to get home. And so that's kind of what I would pick up from my patients, is that they're always thinking about somebody else, and it really helps you as a healthcare provider. We see that example and that modeled, and it kind of encourages us to.
That's amazing. It really is the faith of these people, because you're a physician and it's your job to heal, and you're healing, mostly physical illnesses, which has a science to it. But faith does not have a science to it. And in many ways, it's healed you. You've learned from your patients. It's taught you life lessons. It's showed you a different perspective in life. It may have even helped you in some ways. And that's the interesting about when we help people, there's karma. It ends up helping us as well. And that's amazing. And I wanted to ask you, because you've written different books, and there's something that I'm very interested in. One of the books that you wrote about was the importance of sleep. How important it is to have proper sleep. And
yes.
I know that some of us, even though we're doing well, for the most part, we have nightmares. We wake up in sweats. And you can control the way that you think during the day. And you can say, oh, that's nonsense. That's just evil lying to me, or I'm lying to myself, or I can reprogram. I can think better. You can do all that, but you can't do it while you're sleeping. So how do you correct sleep if it's so important, if it's beyond your control?
Wow, you've opened up a Pandora's box there. Let me say this. There's a lot of different dynamics with sleep. And kind of one of the things that my book talks about is, where is God in all this? We don't typically think of God in the equation, but the scriptures remind us that sleep was God's idea, that He created sleep. And so often, I think, for most of us, the problems that we have sleeping are kind of things that we've kind of put on ourselves. It has to do with our lifestyle. For many people, it's, trying to go to sleep, and the things that race through their mind, that list that's still undone, that, kind of keeps us up and keeps us worried and keeps us occupied, And then, on the other hand, there's all of these lifestyle issues, the pace of our life, and, what we're doing, and the fact that we're not as active and exercising as much, and our diet, all of those things play into it. And so what this kind of does is take a step back and say, okay, where is God? And, it's funny, you can even go and kind of read in the Genesis story about this. It's kind of interesting. There's a phrase there that says, "In the evening and the morning were the first day." And it kind of, the scriptures start out that. In fact, the Hebrews, they started their day when the sun went down. And we, especially in Western society, the day starts when we get up. And the difference is, for the Hebrews, and actually the biblical perspective, is that, you really start your day in rest, and then trusting God. And, we're just the opposite. We want to get up and go. And so it kind of really starts with that, how God, how God invented sleep, and how we're to, kind of come to Him. I mean, I'll tell you, sometimes even, we talk about different attitudes, and there's a calm heart, where how the scriptures and God's Spirit helps us to go to sleep when we're facing, all kinds of different things and circumstances in our lives. And then there's also times in our life when God wakes us up. He has a message to tell us. A thing that pops in our mind when we're sleeping, I'm a big believer that that's often God speaking to us, trying to get our attention because we're just too busy in the daytime to really, to hear God's voice. We just got too much on our agenda to really listen to what God has to say.
I hear you, and you made very, very good points. And I was reading, because I'm interested in reading, information and learning stuff. And it was interesting about reading about the saints who battled Satan. And one of them says that if you have nightmares, to wake up and do the sign of the cross and then go back to sleep. And that works sometimes. But yes, I understand what you're saying. Though it can be difficult. And also, you wrote in your book, you also wrote a book called A Spoonful of Courage for the Sick and Suffering. And what difference can a spoonful of courage for the sick and suffering make in the lives of those going through an illness? What's your idea of a spoonful of courage?
Well, I think the point is that it helps to keep us focused, and so often in life, especially with difficult circumstances, we lose focus. We become distracted by whatever difficulties, life is giving us, whether it's a healthcare crisis, cancer, problem sleeping, and we lose focus. There's a story in the scriptures, and everybody knows this story about when Peter walked on water, and he did for a while, and was walking towards Jesus, and then he sank. And, when Jesus got him back in the boat, he says, Peter, why'd you lose your faith? And the reason is because, Peter was distracted by the wind and the waves and the storm. When Peter lost his focus, he lost his faith.
Well, that's what it is. But I had to have faith in God first before I had faith in myself. And yes, and my life was very stormy and it was like a hell. But God, He brought colors into my life. He made it beautiful. So for those tuning in, this is The Cure. I'm your host, Aimee Cabo.
Love is the answer, God is the cure, reveals from a very sincere and honest position Aimee Cabo's life, a warrior who didn't give up and achieved the dream of her life. You can get to know more about her and her story on www.godisthecure.com or buying her book on Amazon.com.
If you suffer from persistent depression, call Neurosciences Medical Clinic to schedule a free consultation for new effective FDA-approved treatments such as intranasal ketamine or Neurostar TMS, a no-medication treatment. Neurosciences Medical Clinic. Call now, 786-600-7005. Neurosciences Medical Clinic, 786-600-7005, 786-600-7005.
And now we continue with Aimee Cabo and The Cure on 880 The Biz.
Thanks for joining us. You're listening to The Cure with Aimee Cabo. Remember, we're live every Friday at 2 p.m. on your radio on AimeeCabo.com. We are joined today by Dr. Charles Page, Dr. Boris Nikolov, and Dr. Charles Page is the author of A Spoonful of Courage. Dr. Page, let me ask you this. What is the single most important idea that you would like to share with us about A Spoonful of Courage?
Well, as we were mentioning earlier, just a change in focus, focusing on the facts instead of our feelings, and then having faith in the facts, and that should help to drive us forward. Another way of saying that is something that we mentioned earlier, just learning to look upward when we face difficult times, when we face difficult circumstances, looking upward instead of looking inwards. Probably one of the greatest things to think about when we go through suffering, though, is to realize the opportunities that suffering brings. So often we look at the difficult circumstances and the pain that we feel when we face a health crisis, but just realizing that there are opportunities. First of all, we have an opportunity to grow and to mature, in a difficult time. And I know that you've been through some difficult, times in your life. Those experiences are one of those things that help us to grow up and mature. another thing is just, that we have opportunity to influence other people. As we've talked about so often, because of our experiences, we have a different set of, first of all, empathy, and then experience that we can bring in to help people. I think it means so much to people when they realize that we've been there.
Right.
So, it's opportunity to influence, and, none of us would like to go, none of us wants to have that kind of experience, but yet, on the other side of that, there are good things that can come out of it. From a Christian perspective, there's always an opportunity to intimacy, and and we grow in our relationship with God. It's funny. I've noticed the people who really go through suffering. Those are the people who it just seems like their relationship with God is almost palpable. You know what I'm saying? It's not a theoretical thing. It's a very personal relationship, and those people have learned intimacy in the midst of their suffering. And so, so often we don't think about those things, but they're real, and I think they can keep us going in a difficult health challenge.
That's really amazing, Dr. Page, because very few surgeons I've seen talk like you. Are you sure that's the right profession? I mean, the right specialty for you? But I bet you're
Well, I'm trying to quit my day job, Boris, but it's not working.
But that's great. That's great. I mean, I'm impressed, really, because this is how things are supposed to be done. Yeah.
Well, maybe that's what Michelle meant by there's grace in suffering, or that there's grace in pain. Because when it comes to mental suffering, if you can reprogram your brain and just learn to think differently, you can have breaks. You can even go through a period of time where you don't have depressive episodes or not have them at all again. But when you have a physical ailment, like, for example, I didn't know 50% of women get arthritis. Guess what? I found out. and neuralgia. So this is something that really nothing can be done. There's no medication. There's no cure. So I heard or read somewhere to do everything for the glory of God. So even if it's a chore, even if it's exercising, and if you're going through pain, for the glory of God or for the conversion of sinners. I tell my husband, I may be suffering for whatever sins my daughter may do in the future. Who knows? And so that's how I justify it, to where I'm willing to accept it. And in fact, I'm grateful for it, that I'm doing something good with it. And that's how I retrained my brain.
Well said. Yes, I agree. I mean, so much of it is in our mind. But even beyond even the natural mind and the natural way of thinking, it goes beyond that. That God, actually, the Spirit living in our lives, actually, working with us, to come along with us and help us in those times. But absolutely, I mean, definitely it's the way we look at our circumstances that makes all the difference in the world.
And people think that suffering is a bad thing. There isn't really such a bad thing in suffering. For example, people say, oh, you've been through so much. And it was a long time. Yes, 3 nuns told me the story of Job. But and I thought, okay, every once in a while I've questioned, why did it have to take so long? Did it take me that long to grow up? But
oh my goodness, well, I feel like I'm still growing up myself.
That's funny.
When we start thinking about Job, Job asked God why. Like, I think he asked him 16 times to give an explanation for why he was going through this. And, God never answered him, really. God.
I got an answer. I read it in one of my, I was reading about a saint or something, and it said that the saint really went through a lot of trouble with evil, with the devil, and he said, God, why did it take you so long? Why did I suffer up until now? And he says, a masterpiece takes time.
There you go.
I thought that was great.
When I'm going through a tough time.
The better the artwork, the more time it takes. There you have it.
Yeah, the old saying, the greater the weight, the greater the work. But
yeah,
man, that's for sure. That's not the answer that I want. They say God always answers, but
But it worked for me, because I didn't understand it for a long time. I said, wait, 25 years? Really?
But amazing. We just really need to do more things like that in medicine, because It's just we need to have God in our lives, not only in medicine, but as it is, it's kind of feel like all over the place things are going weird.
But God never said the cross would not be heavy. And who
No,
are,
we're just taking that people are like not believing so much. It's like,
and who are we to think that we're better than God, that he could take the cross when he didn't owe us anything.
Right.
And he was the king, and he was and he is all powerful. So if he could sacrifice his life for us that we are so unworthy, what makes us think we shouldn't suffer and go the same path?
right,
Wow.
okay.
So what makes us better? What makes us exempt? So I don't expect never to suffer. I expect to be suffering something, and if I'm not suffering anything, I'm doing something wrong.
So, doctor, were you close to El Paso?
I'm sorry?
Are you close to El Paso and the tragedy there by any chance? Did you help with those victims?
No, actually, I'm on the other side of Texas, but it's really, it's really kind of, left all of us reeling how these things can happen. And it's funny, so often we politicize all this, but,
Yeah.
but just thinking about, the evil of someone that would do that for whatever reason he did it. It's just really sad that these are real people that have been affected. It's crazy. We live in a crazy society, and I wish I had all the answers for everything.
Right.
I do know that as a physician, and what I've been learning as I study the literature is that if I'm not sharing my faith with people, then I may not be giving them everything that they need to have a good outcome. I mean, that doesn't mean that I always just to go away, come in and, share my faith with people. But even just to ask them if we could have a conversation, and you'd be surprised how many people want to have a conversation about spiritual things.
Well, let's do it as a challenge to all our listeners. Have somebody next to you, have a conversation about faith, and maybe we'll spur the things a little bit, because if we do have God in our life, we wouldn't do that. I mean, this person, I don't know, whatever he was going through his head.
It doesn't hit very far from home. Look at my daughter, for example. She depends on a psychic.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, I have to use psychology with her because she's really, really, convinced. And I said, okay, well, I have God. He's free. And, all right, well, the next problem comes around. Mine's free. I'm sorry, you have to pay for yours.
Yes.
But there is a lot. There is division, and there is a lot of anger, and there is hatred. But worry and stress and anger, those are all things that are of the evil. And I believe that love is the answer for everything. But your only cure, your only cure.
I mean, that's the greatest expression of love that we could ever. We can't even understand that kind of love,
Yes.
And that's really the answer. I really, really believe the older I get that there's not a political answer for this. Both sides are going to, make up things, but really just individuals expressing love and serving people in love is really what's going to make the difference in our world.
Right.
And I wonder about that young fellow that, did that in El Paso. I mean, really what was his home life like? And, maybe there could have been somebody that could have intervened in his life and just encouraged him a little bit or talked to him a little bit, and it may have made a world of difference,
And you guide him to the right side, yeah.
I mean, we'll never know.
Sometimes we're guilty for what we don't do, what we fail to do. And we are our brother's keeper.
Well said.
And then there's the other thing, evil. Some people are just evil, or they're mentally sick, and you don't know which one comes your way. But for that, we have our faith. I'm not afraid of death. If it should visit me one day, if it should come, I accept God's will, however it comes. I've gotten to that point in my life that I trust God in everything, and I'm so happy that these days I don't worry. In fact, I'm grateful every day. I tell God thank you every day that I don't worry, that this, that. So many things that most of us take for granted that think it's a normal, everyday thing. To me, it's a big deal. Because I no longer go through depressive episodes. I know what it's like to be on the other side. I know what it's like to suffer deeply. I know what it's like to give up hope and feel like there's nothing left. I know what that's like. But I've gotten to throughout my life, I've always tried to stay close to God, except I believed I did enough, but it wasn't just prayer that I had to do. It was my actions. It had to be followed by actions. It had to be followed by a belief system. And it took a while, and it's okay if it takes you a long time. Just don't give up hope. Don't give up belief. But we've come to the end of the show. Dr. Page, thank you so much for being on the show with us.
Thank you.
We really appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
It was great to talk with you guys.
If you want to give one last shout out to the listeners, be my guests.
Let me just say our website has a prayer wall that you can come and put your prayer request on, and we'd just like to connect with you. If you would find us at a spoonfulofcourage.com or charleswpage.com, and just connect with us and put your prayer request on and let us pray for you. We do believe that prayer, like we've mentioned over and over in the show, that this makes a difference. And
that's how it started with me.
Yeah, so just connect with us. You can also text the word believe to 66866, and that'll connect you with us as well.
Excellent.
So that wasn't 30333022.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Hey, listen, I'll tell you, I'm getting bad. I'm kind of like that old surgeon that says I've never made a mistake, but I've got a real short memory. I'm getting bad about remembering numbers and things too. So
either way, we'll
being on the show.
Either way, we'll have this information. Any information for Dr. Page can be found on aimeecabo.com under guests. And thank you all for tuning in. Just remember, no matter how bad life gets, don't give up hope. Because for us, for me, and for my family, we believe.
Love is the answer, God is the cure, reveals from a very sincere and honest position Aimee Cabo's life, a warrior who didn't give up and achieved the dream of her life. You can get to know more about her and her story on www.godisthecure.com or buying her book on Amazon.com.
If you suffer from persistent depression, call Neurosciences Medical Clinic to schedule a free consultation for new effective FDA-approved treatments such as intranasal ketamine or Neurostar TMS, a no-medication treatment. Neurosciences Medical Clinic. Call now, 786-600-7005. Neurosciences Medical Clinic, 786-600-7005, 786-600-7005.
The Cure with Aimee Cabo was brought to you by IMIC Research, 786-310-7477 or www.godisthecure.com. Tune in every Friday at 2 p.m. for The Cure with Aimee Cabo, right here on 880 The Biz.